My name is Thelma English, and I am recording 31 sessions of my class, American Literature, and we focus primarily on shifting worldview in American literature. Welcome back. If you have been a live student before, welcome. If this is your first time listening to me teach, I will try to be concise, precise, and interesting. If you have any questions about American Lit or problems with this, my email will come up in the presentation and we'll see how much response I get. And that is, I don't know if I can reply to everyone or not. Okay, I hope you enjoy this video. This is American literature. We start with the first literature, which is the literature of the Puritans. Let's get to know one another. What I do in the live class is I pass out 3x5 file cards, and I ask every student to put their name at the top and tell me what grade they're in, then to tell me something about their family. I'm one of 5, I'm the oldest of 6, that type of thing. And hobbies. If I know that you skateboard and you come in with a cast on your leg one morning, then I know that I can tease you about skateboarding or something like that. I like to know a little bit about you. And if you have someone hosting this class for you, they will want to know about you, and they will tell you these little things about themselves too. Ministry can be anything that you are actively involved in with your family, or it can be something that you hope to go into someday, or you can put a big question mark there. Prayer would be things that you are requesting prayer for. As a teacher, I never let anyone see these cards except to me. Even my teacher assistant does not see these. I keep these private, and I use these to pray for you. And I hope that your teacher or your facilitator running this class will do the same. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Thelma English. I just turned 65 years old yesterday. My family, I've been married for 45 years. And I have 2 sons. I miscarried a bunch of times, so that we ended up with 2 sons. And I have 4 grandchildren. I live in Oregon. My hobbies: reading, teaching. The Bible. The Bible would be my favorite hobby. And then I also sew. And I hope to be able to do more sewing now that I am semi-officially retired. Ministry. I have always been involved in ministry, whether it was teaching Sunday school or going into the boys' prison here in Oregon. My husband and I did that for 8 years. I always have some type of ministry. Even now, I'm still going into the police and the fire departments in my local city, and I take them cinnamon rolls, and sometimes to the firefighters fighting some of the Oregon, California wildfires. Prayer that I can be succinct and do a good job and help you to enjoy this class. Okay. Books. You will need a stack of books. Yes, this looks like a stack of books. I suggest to you that you go to exodusbooks.com and work with Mr. Eli Evans, the store owner. If you go to his website and then search for Thelma, it will bring up all of my classes and the book sets. As of right now, I think in July 2022, they are, as of June, the entire set was $42.30, which is cheap. It's because they're Dover editions. They are a cheaper paperback edition, but you will also need a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin, anything that is not abridged. Abridged is where someone goes through and shortens the story, usually for a younger student. We don't use anything abridged. We read the real thing. And any copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin is just great. I think Dover even has a copy, but they're readily available, used and in bookstores. I do prefer these Dover editions for all of the other books so that we can be on the same page numbers and match up with each other in class, especially when I am sharing quotes, things that are very important. Some of the authors that we fly through because they are important, but not important to us as Christians. Some of those authors, I give you page numbers and show you and explain to you what I have highlighted on those pages so that forevermore you will know the important things that Emerson or Thoreau said, things like that. You have piles of paper before you right now, hopefully. You have a great big stack of 446 pages. That would be 223 pieces of paper, hopefully hole punched. Maybe you need to do that on your own. I take mine and have them printed. I hole punch all of my syllabuses myself so that I save that fee. They usually charge twice one for the copy and one to a hole punch. So I suggest you do your own hole punching. But that is your syllabus. It's a large PDF available at Thelma's Library at the website. You can download it, put it onto a flash drive, take it in somewhere, have it printed, or if you have an awesome printer, you can print it up. It's all in black and white, but you do need a 3-ring notebook big enough to hold 223 pages of paper plus extra, but it is 446 pages. The syllabus is a collection of all types of things we'll talk about in a minute. Then you should have in front of you a glossary. That's it's part of the syllabus. It's pages 411 to 425 of your syllabus. And that glossary is online at Thelma's Library in session 1. And it's also searchable, so that if you are looking up someone like Emerson, you could type in Emerson and find not just the glossary entry that is titled Emerson, but you will find everywhere in the glossary where Emerson is mentioned. The glossary is like your own private dictionary for this class, so that you don't look up someone like, let's say, Emerson again, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Of course, there are hundreds of thousands of pages on the internet about Ralph Waldo Emerson, and we take a particular direction here to talk about worldview in this class, and so I prefer that you use our own glossary. To begin with, anyway, you have a 5-page schedule that shows sessions 1, which is today, through 31. That usually is sometime in May. If you start the second week of September, if you take a week off the week of Thanksgiving, if you take about 3 weeks off at Christmas, 1 week for spring break, you should be ending the 3rd week in May. And your schedule is just labeled session 1 to 31. It tells you what to read. It tells you when the quizzes are coming up, when the exams are coming up. It tells you what paper you are writing, how far you should be on your paper, how many pages to read this week, how many pages out of your syllabus, how many pages to read from the book we are currently reading. That schedule is the key to your success. And it's 5 pages for American Lit. Then you have an American Lit syllabus reading checklist. And that reading checklist, it follows the reading content on the schedule, but it gets all 31 sessions onto one piece of paper. And so when you finish your reading in your book, reading in your syllabus, reading any handouts from session 1, you would have your parent put a little initial on that page, the reading checklist, have them put a little initial by session 1. And then every quarter, you will be asked to turn that in to your teacher or facilitator, or your mom can do this for you, and verify that, yes, you did read everything that was assigned to be read. Then you have a roster. I highly suggest that your class prepare a roster, and just make sure that you make it very clear that this is only for class purposes. This is not, if somebody's dad sells car insurance, they cannot use this list to call people and suggest that they get their better car insurance. It's only for class use. And that way the parents can see where everyone lives in case they want to try and carpool. And in case you want to call a student or call a teacher, you need to have all of those numbers there. So you have all of these piles of paper, and hopefully you brought a 3-ring binder with you today so that you can put that in there. You'll be getting paper almost every week in American Lit. The syllabus I mentioned is 446 pages. That means 223 pieces of paper. Pages 411 through 446 are the brand new glossary I just prepared. I finished preparing that in 2021, I believe. And I have mine always printed double-sided on 223 pieces of paper. I do always specify black and white. If they see anything color on any page, anytime they print for color, they would charge you. So I always specify, please print this in black and white, double side. You're going to be assigned syllabus reading every week along with your book reading. Use this reading checklist to record. I just explained to you how to do that. This is page 1. This is what page 1 of a very well-worn syllabus looks like, with my little highlights to highlight dates and names and things like that. And your syllabus, that's yours. I do suggest that you hang on to that and make it your own and make notes in your syllabus. I have students who take this right on with them to college. If you end up going to Corban University here in Oregon, their American thought and culture is very similar to my American literature, which is basically focusing on shifting worldviews. And I have students repeatedly tell me that this is very useful to them in their class. The glossary is on pages 411 to 425. As mentioned before, it looks like this. It just looks like a little mini dictionary, and that's what it is. It's just filled with literary terms and important worldview information. The schedule. The schedule, the 5-page schedule, is the key to your success. It lists all 31 sessions. Reading assignments, writing assignments, and optional read alouds are listed week by week. Today is session 1. So let's take a look at session 1 on the first page of that 5-page schedule. And this is what we have on session 1. It says American Lit Schedule, Introduction to Lit Circle, all those non-interesting things I'm talking about right now, but which we must learn well. We'll do an overview of the class today. We'll have introductions. If you are doing introductions in a class setting with a teacher or a facilitator, I suggest that when we did the cards or at some point in this presentation, that you would simply stop this recording and do some little introductions. Give everyone 60 seconds to tell their name and what grade they're in and why they are in class. They're here because they're very excited, or they're here because their mother is making them or something. And then we review class materials right now, and we go over the books so that you know about your books. The reading this week is from the syllabus only. You don't have any book reading this week. It's all from the syllabus. And in the syllabus, you're going to be reviewing the glossary, what is that? 14 pages. Reviewing the glossary. That means you don't have to read every word on every one of those 14 pages, but I suggest you look at every heading, every bolded heading, and then skim over the material to see kind of what that item is, what I'm talking about. That way, if we have kind of a fun ungraded quiz and I pull out items from the glossary and say, what does this mean? Without having to look it up in the glossary, you might be able to say, oh, I think I know where that is anyway, it's in my glossary. And if I ask you to read a section from the glossary, if your teacher asks you to read something from the glossary, you'll know where to find your glossary. I suggest marking it in your syllabus, either color the tops of the pages red with a felt pen, or put a little sticky note in there, or some type of a divider so that you can always find your glossary, because we will refer to that in class now and then. I'll say so, and I'll just give your name and say, would you please read the entry in the glossary for Romanticism? And then you'll be expected to read that. Things that we read all the time or talk about all the time, you might want to highlight those entries. Definitely make this your own. And I'm sure there will be some spelling errors or textual errors. You are welcome to send those to me. I don't know if I'll ever go through the glossary and redo it again, though, to be real honest with you at this point. You're going to review the timeline. That's way at the end of the syllabus, page 441 to 446. That timeline is a timeline of American literature, and it's worth looking over. I have added last year, I did add quite a few things to that timeline, even adding some things about American inventions, things like that, that give you a little bit of an idea of what was going on historically in America at the same time that the books are being written. I'd ask you to read Changing Worldviews. And the reason I ask you to read it is so you can put a little sticky there, a marker, so that you'll know it's in your syllabus and you can refer to it. It's on page 32 is a chart, and pages 363 to 369. Feel free to flip to those now if you have your material all in your 3-ring binder. That's Changing Worldviews. And we talk about theism and we talk about deism, and these are worldviews, and we will learn about these worldviews as we read the writings of the people who lived during this period. So when we are reading about a theistic worldview, we'll be reading about the Puritans. And then as we are reading about a deistic worldview, we'll be reading about some of the founding fathers, whether they were actually deists or not, but they fall into that period, and they do reflect the changing worldview very well. So I want you to look through the changing worldviews. Feel free to take your highlighter and highlight all of the major categories, the major theism, or the major category of deism, romanticism, to mark those so that you can find them again in your notebook. If you have not guessed by now, you're getting familiar with your syllabus this week. Then review writing papers from SSE, page 373. And that is telling you don't plagiarize, and it tells you make sure that you give your paper a title, and that you make sure you fulfill the word count, make sure you don't use any contractions. We use a formal style of writing in this class, etc. Then read syllabus pages 1 to 32, which is magazine and history from books. It's all about Puritan history. It's about the Mayflower Compact and the Arabella Covenant. These are very, very important items that were written, and this is an American literature class. These are important things that were written early on in America. In fact, the Mayflower Compact was written and signed before they got, it was all the people of the Mayflower and the Arabella Covenant before they even got off the boat. They made this covenant with one another. What will we do if something goes wrong? What will we all agree to? And they all agreed to certain things. And this would be the very, very smallest seed foundation of our Constitution, where we make pledges and covenants with one another. Your writing this week, there is none. You're going to use this week to get familiar with your syllabus. Please spend as much time as you can in your syllabus, reading it, enjoying it, getting to know it. Optional online, generally, it is only the moms who are very interested in optional online. This is a free audio lecture set of 1 to 12 that J.I. Packer has on the internet, and I simply have provided links for it here. J.I. Packer, History of the Theology of the Puritans. So if you have a fascination with Puritan theology, you could listen to this session of 12 lectures or save them for later. And that would make you very, very familiar with all of their theology. So this is the first part of the schedule. And this is how you learn what you're supposed to write and what you're supposed to read every week. The reading checklist, go ahead and pull that out. It's a 1-page handout, and it just has session 1, 2, 3, 4, and on through 31, all on 1 page. And this is where your parent would put a little initial on the left or the right margin of that checklist, just to make sure that you say, Mom, I did all my reading, and she checks, make sure you did it, and then she initials that. Because otherwise it would be possible to go completely through this class and perhaps not even read the syllabus and miss out on a major part of the curriculum. You can see session 1 where we go through everything I just read off. Then session 2 next week, we're reading our Anne Bradstreet handout booklets. You've got those with you, and we'll be doing an explication sheet, which basically means we're exploring the worldview of this author that we are reading. We're reading Anne Bradstreet next week, and we're going to explore her worldview and talk about it. Week 3, you can tell we're reading the captivity narrative. So if you like cowboys and Indians things, or Puritans and Indian things, then we'll be reading poetry written by Anne Bradstreet, a famous, famous female Puritan poet, and we'll be examining her worldview through her words. We'll look at her words, and you'll try to tell me what her worldview is. Now, we know those early Puritans were all Christians, so it's pretty easy to figure out what her worldview is, but this is a practice assignment next week. And then the captivity narrative of Mary Rowlandson is absolutely fascinating. The Mayflower Compact, and Richard Baxter will be reading week 4, which is fantastic. He has a little short essay that's called Directions for Hating Sin, How to Hate Sin, which is awesome. And then How to Spend a Day with God, and it's in your syllabus, pages 374 to 384. And you will love Richard Baxter. And then our assignment that week is to write an imitation of his work and write a mini edition of How to Spend the Day with God, how you would advise a Christian to spend the day with God. You've got all these piles of papers, and you've got booklets. One of your booklets is Valley of Vision. I highly suggest that everybody simply purchase a copy of this book. There are cheap paperback copies of this. There are beautiful leather bound copies that have black ribbons. I frequently give this away as a gift, especially for people who've been recently bereaved or had trauma in their life, because this is the perspective of people who lived in the early 1600s through the mid 1600s, where personal loss was simply a fact of life, and there were no insurance policies. You know, if your husband died or your child died, there you were looking simply to God and to your neighbors for help. And Valley of Vision, the prayers here represent prayers from that time period. It's an incredible booklet. You have a few samples here in the Valley of Vision little booklet. This is my copy, which I've had for more than 20 years. Just an idea for your teacher or facilitator. I usually ask a student to read each week. I will say next week, session 2, Mary or James, would you please read our devotion next week? And you can pick one from this booklet, and you don't have to read page 2 on session 2. You can just pick one that appeals to you, and that gets you looking through the booklet. And then I ask them if they will read next week. and make a note on that, and then ask them to read it a couple of times at home out loud in case there are some unfamiliar words. And I suggest the teacher facilitator make sure that you understand the vocabulary too. We're dealing with a King James era vocabulary. The King James Bible was published in 1611. So this is 1620, 1630s. And so the vocabulary is the same. And so this is really cool. And I always ask kids to volunteer. The next booklet that you should have in your lap is the Anne Bradstreet poetry booklet. Anne Bradstreet, you can see she lived very early in the 1600s, born in Europe, and then came here to America with her husband. And her husband was then the governor of here in New England. And I think her brother-in-law, we'll learn when we get there, her brother-in-law stole her poetry and took it to Europe and had it printed. And she was a little upset because she did not intend for her work to be published. And he published her as in a book called The 10th Muse. If you've taken my classical lit class, which I have not recorded yet, I hope to do that next year, but in classical lit, you learn about the 9 muses. And so he's using a classical reference. And of course, all of the Puritans were familiar with all classical literature, reading much of it in the original Greek and then in Latin. And so they would have understood this title very well, that aside from the 9 muses, who were the pagan muses, here she is the 10th muse. Lately sprung up in America, anything that looks like an S, that's an S. If you just read the copy that I have made for the front piece, the cover of the booklet, you'll get used to what their S's and F's look like. The 10th muse, lately sprung up in America, or several poems compiled with great variety of wit and learning full of delight. And then these are poems that she wrote, which are awesome. You'll enjoy that. And you'll have to tell your teacher what is her worldview. You'll read her poetry and say, how can you prove, using Anne's own words, how can you prove that she is a theist? And I'll tell you a secret, yes, she's a theist. But how do you prove that to me? And so you'll have to use quotes that tell you, the reader, your reader, because now you're going to be the author, that tell your reader, the teacher or facilitator or your mom, that you know what her worldview is by her words. And let us hope that our worldview is very obvious by our words, because sometimes we are not using words that express our relationship with God and our theism. You have a booklet, Frances Ellen Watkins, an amazing poetress. If you can't tell, she is Black, and an amazing poet. Born in Baltimore. I have a little, took this from the poetryfoundation.org, which has a wealth of information about poets, about this fantastic, she helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. She was an excellent writer. She met famous people. She went important places and spoke in front of important groups. Amazing, amazing, talented lady. A poetess, fiction writer, and a talented journalist. Now, all 3 of these booklets are printed double-sided, folded in half, and stapled. So you have your Valley Vision, your Anne Bradstreet poetry, and your Frances Ellen Watkins poetry. And feel free to look up these authors and find more about what they have written. Many places like poetryfoundation.org, or if you just type in Anne Bradstreet, there's a whole website devoted to Puritans that is very well cited and you could use for this class. Internet resources always have to be used with caution. You must go to actual places and not use Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is written by people from our generation and they're not reliable. So these booklets I print double-sided, I fold them half and staple in the middle, and these are pretty awesome people. Okay, today's devotion from the Valley Vision, I'd like to pick one. I'm going to just pick it out. I'm going to go to the one that has the most signatures on it. After I have a student read a devotion to begin the class, then I go to that page and follow along. And then I open up my copy there and I ask them to sign it. So I'm looking for a page that has the most signatures, and that happens to be page 11. And so this is a poem written by a Puritan 400 years ago. O God of the open ear, teach me to live by prayer as well as by providence, for myself, soul, body, children, Family church, give me a heart frameable to thy will. So might I live in prayer and honor thee, being kept from evil, known and unknown. Help me to see the sin that accompanies all I do and the good I can distill from everything. Let me know that the work of prayer is to bring my will to thine, and that without this it is folly to pray. When I try to bring thy will to mine, it is to command Christ to be above him and wiser than he. This is my sin and pride. Just like Satan, that's his sin, trying to be more than Christ or God. I can only succeed when I pray according to thy precept and promise, and to be done with it as it pleases thee, according to thy sovereign will. When thou commandest me to pray for pardon, peace, brokenness, it is because thou wilt give me the thing promised for thy glory, as well as for my good. Now remember, he just said, for thy glory. The Puritans, it's all about glorifying God. Help me not only to desire small things, but with holy boldness to desire great things for thy people, for thyself, that they and I might live to show thy glory. That's what a Puritan lives for, to show thy glory. Teach me that it is wisdom for me to pray for all I have, out of love, willingly, not of necessity, that I may come to thee at any time till I open my needs acceptably to thee, that my great sin lies in my not keeping the savor of thy ways, that the remembrance of this truth is one way to the senses of thy presence, that there is no wrath like the wrath of being governed by my own lusts for my own ends. And that's the way the devotion ends on page 11 in our booklet. This would be the last two lines, that there is no wrath like the wrath of being governed by my own lusts for my own ends. This is the absolute opposite of Romanticism. And of course, at the very end of this year, we'll be learning about Romanticism, which is the opposite of being a Puritan. The Puritans were always looking to glorify God. Everything they said, did, wrote, everything. And in Romanticism, where we remain firmly rooted today, Romanticism is all about me, myself, and I. What do I want? What are my needs? What are my emotions, especially? Okay, so somebody needs to volunteer for next week. Feel free to use the website, thelmaslibrary.com. You would select Student Access from the left menu bar. Then you would select American Lit from the list of classes available. And then you'll use the username and the password that your teacher or facilitator will give to you. And that gets you into all 31 sessions. Class materials are arranged by class session number. This is not a professional website. It's a website that my two sons and my husband created and maintain. And so it's rinky-dink family style. You simply choose your session and you open up session one. All the papers that you got today, they're also in session one. So that if you lose whatever piece of paper you got today, you can go to session one and you can download it and print it again. Or if you lose 10 pages out of your syllabus, you can open up the big PDF file and you can select those syllabus pages and click on your printer, print front and back syllabus pages, 211 to 213, whatever it was you lost, but they are arranged by session number. In each session is a PowerPoint video of my teaching, and class handouts are there, the quizzes are there, the quiz answers are there for the teachers, exams and exam answers available for teachers or the class facilitator. You'll have to contact me. Those students don't have access to quizzes and exams. Sample student work is available on request, and it's possible that your teacher facilitator has already contacted me for this so that they can look at some sample student work. Pretty much from every assignment that is made, I have some sample student work so that the parents grading or the teacher or facilitator who is grading your work can have a little bit of assistance as far as what is expected. And if they want to share that with you in class, then of course they may. If you have to miss any class for any reason, you have to watch this class later. If you can't make it to class next week, you have to watch this video on your own and bring a note from your mother that says you listened to this audio, because there are only 31 sessions. They're all 2 hours, but if you miss a session, you've missed way too much information. If you miss 3 classes and don't make them up by watching the videos, you miss 10% of the class. So yes, you must make up every single session. As a review of just things we're going to make sure happen in this class, if you miss a class, a quiz, or an exam, there are consequences. The pandemic is pretty much over at this point, and according to your parent, your teacher, your facilitator, hopefully they will have some strict rules. I always require us as a class that they bring me a note and from the parent telling me that they have listened to that class that they missed. Of course, there are always going to be times when you, especially if you're a homeschooler, that you take your vacations in September and October, go hunting with your dad or something like that. And I don't want to destroy your life or ruin your vacation with your family. You just have to make it up and you have to do it well. Quizzes and exams. This quizzes, you've got to be here for quizzes. If one person is missing from class, the week we take a quiz, the quizzes can get graded, but nobody gets them back until absolutely everyone has taken the quiz. There is just too much temptation to share what is on the quiz or what the correct answers are. Exams, this is up to your teacher, facilitator, or parent to decide how to do exams. I have typically always done exams in class, and they take about an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. The first exam is relatively easy, but there have been times, the last time I taught American Lit, last year, we chose to do most of our exams at home and have a parent proctor that and then sign it and send it back, and then I grade that, because then we recovered that class time and had class time to cover more things in class. And then the parent had to proctor that exam, but you can do as you see fit. Grades, 90% is an A. There are many places, many universities where grades are not done like that. It's Western Seminary, where I went to school. 96 for one of my instructors, 96% was an A, 95% was a B. But in American Lit, 90% is an A minus, but it's an A. That's up to your teacher. Clothing, be comfortable, but please don't wear anything rude or distracting. Rude or distracting would be clothing that is see-through or low neck for a girl or low slung pants for a guy. You don't have to wear your best clothes to class, and you don't have to look like a Puritan at all, but you do have to wear your sweatpants and a nice t-shirt, but please don't wear clothing that has holes all over it or is very revealing, because that's distracting. And this place, we are coming every week to study. We're not coming here to show off or to distract other people. Nobody wants to see the crack in your rear end because your jeans are slung low, whether it's a boy or a girl. No one wants to see your underwear. No one wants to see your bra strap. So please just follow those simple rules. Just be comfortable. Put your phones on silent, please. If for some reason you have to be able to receive calls from your mom, just tell your teacher that you have to be able to receive calls. Otherwise, phones are off unless it's during break and you have to check in with somebody, but phones have to be off. Snow day is a watch at home day. If there's snow in your area, if school's closed, generally your teacher will decide that you'll watch from home that day. You won't drive to someone's house. It's not worth the risk. I suggest that you form an email group. That's what I have always done. So we take all the emails of all the students and the parents who want to get the emails and make them into one group email list, so that if we have questions or information to send out, we can send out as one email and everyone will get the email. And I send this out as a courtesy copy, blank courtesy copy, BCC, so that your email addresses are not exposed to everybody else, just because that's standard practice. But do that. And then if somebody has a question, you go home today and you think, oh my goodness, I can't remember what I was supposed to do. And you send me an email and say, I'm so sorry that I forgot, or I don't think I have all my papers. I don't know if I got all my papers. Well, then when your teacher or the facilitator or your mom wants to tell you what did go answer your question for you, she can answer it and send it to everybody. Say, somebody asked this question just now, and I think it's a great question. Here's my answer to everyone. And send that to everyone, because chances are someone else has that same question too. Late work. I suggest that each class you make a policy concerning late work and you stick to it. During the pandemic, I made quite a few exceptions because we had families who wanted to wear masks and most families did not want to wear masks. And the facility where we were at, if they required us wearing masks, we had to wear them anyway. And you've just got to have policies and stick with them. We all have to function as a group. Concerning late work, if you get to turn in your paper by email 2 days later, then you're punishing the person who stayed up late to finish their paper and turn it in person in class on time. So I suggest that the teacher facilitator make a policy and you stick with it. My policy has been, prior to COVID, my policy has always been that you turn it in the day that it is due. If you did, your printer didn't work or something, which I found is sometimes it's the printer, sometimes you're not quite done with your paper, I will require that it be to me by 2 p.m. or something, 2 or 3 hours by the time they go home. 2 p.m. and you only miss 10%. If you have to send it to me email after class. If you send an email before class and come to class and say, I emailed it to you because my printer doesn't work, I won't punish you that I have to print your paper. But if you send it after class, I'm going to take off 10%. If you send it the next day, I'm going to take off 20%. If you send it 3 days later, the best you can do is get 50% credit for that project. And that's if it's a perfect 100% paper. You can get 50% credit. You simply must learn how to turn things in on time. All seniors are also going to complete a senior project. The topic has to be approved. We'll talk more about that later. It can be a joint or it can be a group effort with approval. A senior paper, every senior in this class will, not a paper, but a project, will present something. You might choose to go into detail and provide a mini biography of another author that we don't look into enough. You might look into Anne Bradstreet or Ellen Watkins, something like that, and give a presentation, which I suggest would be PowerPoint, and present to the class some information. And it would be something about 7 to 12 minutes long, about 12 minutes long if you're collaborating with another senior presenting together. If you're doing this on your own, then I would suggest about 7 minutes long. And that's fun. And it's fun, and you get up in front of people and present your information. But we'll talk more about that later. All right, schedule review, Introduction to Lit Circle. This is today. This is today. We are doing an overview of the class. We've done a lot of that already. We're going to read from the syllabus this week. You're going to review the glossary. I have all the page numbers in blue on the screen now. No writing this week, and the online is always optional. Session 2, what are we going to do next week? We have an introduction to the worldview of theism, and we'll be learning about Anne Bradstreet. We're going to have a quiz on pages 1 to 32 of the syllabus just to check reading proficiency. There'll be very surface level items on the quiz. Teacher, if you have a student who has a individual education, EI assessment, an individual assessment plan anyway. If you have an individual with that, then you can choose to share answer copies with the moms if you trust the mom, that she will use that to direct her student at home to help him and not just to give him all the answers on the quiz. But these will be surface level items. Any book we read, you need to recognize the title of the book and you need to recognize the author. If we read a poem, you need to recognize the title of the poem and the author, the person who wrote that. And the quiz is very surface level and it's always multiple choice. So it's very, very easy. But that will just to check to make sure that you looked over pages 1, the glossary, and pages 1 to 32, which is learning. And we'll begin Puritan structured notes. These are either 3 or 5 pages, I can't remember, but you probably got these last week or you're getting them this week, and you'll be reading this week your Anne Bradstreet handout booklet. So you're reading just poems by Anne Bradstreet that week too, and you will complete a syllabus explication sheet. There's a sample on syllabus page 370 and 71. There's a sample all filled out so you can see what is expected from you. And that is due next week. If you don't want to do that, prove to me her worldview through using quotes from Anne Bradstreet. If you don't want to prove to me she's a theist by doing that, you can choose to write poetry in the style of Anne Bradstreet, which would mean the purpose of the poem was to glorify God and that the poem would be very theist. But it could be modern, it could be modern style, and it could be true or it could be something that you make up, but it would have to be in the form and style. And I would suggest a poem of at least 12 to 14 lines, which may not sound like much, but it is. What do we do? Writing papers for this class, what do we do? There's a syllabus page that goes over everything. Give references for books. If you give a quote in a paper in Anne Bradstreet, for example, an explication sheet where you're proving her theism to me with quotes, the quotes need to have quote marks on them. And it needs to say booklet page or Anne Bradstreet poetry booklet. You need to give the title of the poem. And if you have not learned this already, you need to know that e.g. is the example gratis. No, I can't even say it in the Latin now, but it means for example. That's what we would say. For example, I know that Anne Bradstreet is a theist. For example, in her poem titled My Sister, she exclaims, and then I have a quote from Anne Bradstreet, and then give the page number where it's at. So everything has to be marked in correct quotes. I.e. means, in other words, if I say Anne Bradstreet is a Puritan, and then I put in parentheses, i.e. she is a theist, because all Puritans were theists. In other words, she was a theist. And so there is a difference, for example, or in other words. And I'd like you to learn those. This is high school. Some of you are advanced, junior high school, but you have to learn these things. No contractions unless you're writing dialogue. So for example, if you're writing dialogue where you are writing in the style of an author, for example, when we get to Huckleberry Finn, you might choose to write some dialogue in your paper. Sue said, I'm not going to do it and you can't make me. Yes, then contractions are appropriate because you are writing dialogue. You are the author and you can add quotations. But if you're writing a paper, Anne Bradstreet was not a romantic at all. You can't say Anne Bradstreet wasn't a romantic. You cannot use that contraction. You would say was not, is not, was not, could not, would not. Use a cover sheet. Your class may choose not to do that if you're afraid of cutting down trees and wasting paper and things like that. But there's an example cover sheet on page 426. The advantage of the cover sheet, as in college and seminary, is that it provides complete privacy for the student. The TA can pass those papers back. You can hand a stack of papers to another student. They can pass them back and not see whether that person got an A or a D or what is written on their paper. It keeps everything very, very private. Grades 11 and 12, I expect to give your paper a title, identify your topic. Some younger students, it's all you can do to get your paper prepared and done in time, but older grades, give it a title. Give it a title, be creative. Word counts are listed in the schedule. For example, if you see 300/400/500, that means 300 words is the minimum words required for grades 7 and 8. 400 words are the minimum for grades 9 and 10, and 500 words are the minimum for grades 11 and 12. And that is the minimum. If you write fewer than that amount of words, you're not going to get a C. You're going to be below a C in your grade. And you don't have to write double or triple. I know girls very often do, but these are your minimum word counts. Writing numbers 1 to 10. Many people have not learned this yet. We write numbers. We write numbers as numerals, as words. We write numbers as words 1 through 10. Then we write as numerals 11, 12, 13, etc., unless it begins a sentence. For example, the sentence, there were 2 men in the class. I write out 2 as a word. There were 6 women in the class. There were 11 men in the boat. Now I've passed 10, and so I can use numerals. Unless I'm beginning the sentence, 11 men were in the boat. I would never begin a sentence with a numeral. I would start it with a word. And that's just something to learn. If you don't have a grammar handbook, you should probably ask for one for your birthday or Christmas. Put your name in it, keep it forever, take it with you when you leave home, when you go to college, when you get married, take it with you and have a grammar book so that you learn these little things. The use of sick for misspellings and odd language. This is slide 22. Sick in brackets tells me that you are quoting something exactly the way you found it. Let's say this is a quote. The men wired the boat. And I've put sick in brackets right after this very unusual looking word, wired, which I actually made up because I couldn't think of a good example. The sick tells me you quoted your material correctly. The error is simply the original spelling. That way I won't circle a word and say, what? In the margin, something like that. I will realize you know that you're spelling it that way. You are using it as you found it in your book. This is very typical with Puritans, that they use some unusual words, and you may feel like, I wonder if my teacher will know that this is the way the book had it, and you can just add a sick. And you need to know that for when you read other literature and journals. Check the instructions for the assignment. Always, did you write a paper that satisfies the class's requirements? To prove to me that Anne Bradstreet, for example, is a Puritan. Does your writing shift tense from past to present or future? Did you check for contractions? Sometimes we say, well, Anne Bradstreet was a wonderful poet. She is a theist. Well, we've just switched from was to is. So we need to have everything in the same tense. Anne Bradstreet, sometimes we write in the historical present. Anne Bradstreet is a famous Puritan poetess. She comes over to America on with her parents, and her father is the governor of her eastern coast city that actually escapes me right this minute. This is why I'm making these classes as videos. Do you shift from past to present? Choose one. Did you check for contractions? Have somebody else prove your paper. It's not cheating to have a friend or your mom prove your paper. That's not cheating at all. Have you prepared a cover sheet with your name, grade, paper title, course title? Did you double space your lines and count your words? And remember, I said name and grade, because that's how your teacher knows if you satisfy the word requirement. But your teacher should not have to look up on her roll sheet to see, are you grade 10 or 11? Because grades 10 write fewer words than does grade 11. So do your teacher the favor and put your grade on the cover sheet so that she knows which level to hold you accountable for. Did you double space all of your writing and count your words, subtracting quoted material? When you have 500 words required, you need to count the words, subtracting the quotations, and put the word count on your cover sheet or somewhere on your paper that says 500 words required. This paper has 549 words, something like that. Did you cite your sources? If you don't cite your sources, they don't count as quotes. You have to cite your sources, and you have to use quotation marks. That's just the way it is. And that's all on page syllabus page 373. All right, your 5-page schedule. Go ahead and open that up, and we'll do a schedule review and overview. It's this 5-page thing all stapled together. Mine has dates from 2021, 2022. Yours will have dates for your year this year. And of course, class 1, we've gone over this quite a few times. That's today. Session 2, intro to theism and an introduction to Anne Bradstreet, that Puritan poetess who's really awesome, and a little quiz on session 2, and write a poem or prove to me she is a theist using her own words. Then session 3, we'll read Mary Rowlandson's captivity narrative, which is just awesome. And this is the time to ask your family if you have any captivity narrative. My grandmother only has a few sentences in my great grandmother, a few sentences in a diary talking about a family member who was taken captive by the Indians. But this was actually quite common, so common that it becomes a genre in American literature, a captivity narrative. People who were kidnapped by the Indians and then ransomed back later, very often without half their family. It's a pretty big deal, and it's an awesome narrative. Although it may make you cry the first time. But this is reading, which is done in your syllabus. These are syllabus pages. If you're not reading your syllabus, you miss this whole thing. Then you're also reading an article from a book called Colonies, the Seeds of a Nation, and you're reading Mary Rowlandson's narrative, captivity narrative, and a poem, a cool poem called The Day of Doom. And we'll talk about that in session 3. What's your writing? Session 3, you'll write an explication sheet, which means you will use Mary Rowlandson's own words in the syllabus to prove to me that she is a theist. And believe me, that's very easy to do. Session 4, we're continuing in theism, and we talk about early Puritan life. And you can see on the screen that I have a screenshot of how to spend the day with God, which is excellent. You turn in your homework from week 3, and you're reading the Mayflower Compact, which is in your syllabus, and you're reading Baxter's Directions for Hating God, for Hating Sin, and How to Spend the Day with God. So those are in your syllabus reading. We don't actually use a book until session 7. So this gives you a chance. If you have not ordered your books yet, order your books. The first book you'll need, session 7, is Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. And I suggest the cheaper Dover edition. Then we're going to be examining the Mayflower Compact, and you have 5 questions to answer. Very, very simple. It's just, what did they decide to do before they got off the boat, basically. Session 5, we move into the time period where Americans are shifting from theism to deism. And so we'll be reading Jonathan Edwards, kind of the last of the great Puritans. And then we'll be reading from Thomas Paine, a man who uses a lot of Bible quotes, but who is actually quite a staunch atheist, but did make calculated biblical arguments for the War of Independence or the Revolutionary War, however you have taught it, heard it taught or read it. I prefer the War for Independence over the title, the Revolutionary War, because revolution implies that we went somewhere and killed everybody and overthrew, and we didn't do that here in America. It was our war for independence. We made all these covenants with the king, and then the king broke all of those covenants with us, broke all the charters, all the covenants, and the Puritans were a people of covenants. When they made a covenant, for example, a covenant of marriage, we have that still today, that in some places, I hope, and that they did not break a covenant easily. But because the king, that's what our Declaration of Independence is all about. You broke this, and broke this, you broke this. The king broke every covenant, every promise he made, and they said, we want our independence. We declare we have the right to be independent because you've broken all the covenants. And he makes arguments to Christians, but he's not a Christian. It's a very interesting read, and there is a Thelma's Read Aloud. You can tell it'll take you 2 hours if you look at the bottom of this page. Read aloud of Common Sense. This is Thomas Paine's Common Sense. It is a 2-hour read, but then you only have to read it one time, because I'll kind of explain as I go. I've even underlined in your syllabus some of the most important quotes that you will need. So you're turning in your Mayflower Compact questions and your How to Spend the Day with God, your sample writing like Richard Baxter, and then you're reading Common Sense, which is looks like 15 plus 24 pages. Some of you might have the Dover edition, and if you do, you can read it there, but I will use page numbers, and so it might be a little easier. Then I'd like you also to begin reading Edwards' narrative if you're going to be writing about Edwards. Those who are younger, grades 7 and 8, and 9 and 10 are going to be writing a biography of Jonathan Edwards and need to get started on that reading. That's the easier paper to write. Grades 11 and 12 are going to write a theme study on Common Sense, and that is the more difficult paper to write, and that is quite appropriate for grades 11 and 12. And so that's your reading is Common Sense. And then you see optional online, Read Aloud of Common Sense. I read it aloud to you, and I read aloud from our syllabus copy so you know what page you're at. If unusual words come up, I will tell you what the word means and things like that. Then I've posted another free audio. I think it was from a radio show, What's So Great About America. And it's Dinesh D'Souza, and it's 18 minutes long. I posted also in session 10, which is really cool. It's an outsider perspective of why America is kind of cool. I like Dinesh D'Souza. I've lost a little bit of respect for him because he, on social media, he occasionally uses foul language, and that pretty much cuts an offer off from me. I don't consider that professional at all. Session 6, we're continuing with Jonathan Edwards and Thomas Paine. We have a quiz on Common Sense. It's a very surface level quiz. And then we start new structured notes, from Puritan to Yankee structured notes. We're not Puritan Americans anymore. We're going to be the Yankees, those Yankees, the Yankee Americans. Jonathan Edwards' personal narrative is an amazing, this is a picture of my copy of the first page of his narrative, an amazing, amazing Christian. He's very often called the last of the great Puritans, and you will have to do a little bit of research on him to write a biography. Then next week, there's a warning at the bottom here, bring Benjamin Franklin's autobiography next week. He wrote quite a few different copies, so the Dover copy is the one you want. Session 7, that's when we start reading the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which is really cool. It's the first book from our book list, and we'll be talking about deism and the Enlightenment. There's a quiz on Jonathan Edwards' personal narrative. Where did he like to be inside all the time? Did he like to be outside all the time? You'll know when you get there. And you turn in that paper from Puritan to Yankee structured notes. We continue on those in the PowerPoint for that class time. And you turn in your syllabus reading checklist next week, session 8. And you need to have read all the syllabus reading and have had a parent initial that to say, yes, you actually did read all of that. And then for Benjamin Franklin, what's our assignment? You're writing a character study or theme study based on his autobiographical text. You're going to include text quotes with page numbers to back up your story, and you're welcome to use outside sources. Benjamin Franklin is a fascinating early American, early American leader, and he's a kick. He really is a kick. I think you'll enjoy it. So session 8, you turn this in and you have had it all initialed, and you've read everything that far through session 7 you've read. Session 8, we continue with Franklin. We have the pages we read the last week. The first 80 pages we have a quiz on, surface level. What was his Was his hobby A, B, or C? What did he do to earn extra money? A, B, or C? Things like that, very surface level quizzes. They're usually 10 to 20 questions and they're all multiple choice. Then we're finishing his autobiography, which is really fun. And then you finish writing your paper. These are all short papers. That's why I'm so demanding on papers that you write so many, but they're very short. Research does support that the way to learn how to write papers is to write a whole bunch of short papers. You will write a whole stack of papers this year, but the research shows rather than requiring, for example, one paper every quarter or one paper every semester, that it is better to write a whole bunch of short papers. And these are very short papers. Many of these papers are one sheet of paper. And when you double space it, it might still be on one sheet of paper. But that's how you learn how to write, is by writing short papers. And we'll talk in class about keywords you might want to include in papers. For example, a biography of Benjamin Franklin. There's a whole list of keywords I can think of, and when we get to session 8, then I'll tell you words that you might want to include. You can, if there's a list of words on the PowerPoint, you can always stand up in class and take a photo with your phone of that screenshot, or remember that it's on slide 33 and get there later on and go look for what you want. That would be in session 8 though. And this is the end of the first quarter, no late work accepted. Basically somebody has to be dying, or you have to be taking care of your grandma and she's dying, or you broke your leg, last week. You really have to have a good excuse to not have everything in absolutely on time. If you do have an individual education plan, the IEP, you can request, the parent can request the answer copies as long as the teacher trusts the parent. Session 9, that's our first quarter exam. This last time around, we did take that in class, and it only took students, I think, let me see, session 9, I think it only took kids about 45 minutes. It was very, very easy. It was very short. Oh, kids finished the exam in 10 to 30 minutes. Okay, the first exam. So you may as well do this in class. It was very, very easy. It's very short. Exams are cumulative. So everything on the first exam, most of that will also be on the second exam, plus new things you've learned. And the third exam, most of all of that will be. And the fourth exam is very, very long and cumulative, basically checking everything. So if you miss anything on the first exam, you want to hang on to that and save it and review it for the next exam. So session 9, you're turning in your Franklin papers, and we are starting to read about our Constitution in the syllabus. And this is from an old book. I hope most of my syllabus pages have been cited as far as where the information came from, what books. Some of these are from so long ago that they don't have citations, and you'll just have to forgive me for that. So we turn in our Franklin papers, we take our quiz, we take our exam, and then we get the declaration of the handout, because I forgot to put the declaration in the syllabus and didn't want to have the whole 400 pages scanned in again. So we print the declaration separately. And that's that piece of paper that we turned into the king to say, you made all of these covenant promises with us and you broke them all. We declare our independence from you, therefore. And then the Constitution starts on page 116 and goes through page 135. And I would highly suggest that you use a highlighter on those Constitution pages. 101 to 116 is information about the Constitution. And then the Constitution itself starts on page 116. Some students even take those pages out and staple them together and use them separately in class. There are 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks that we will actually use our constitutions. I'll ask someone to read, would you read the 5th Amendment? Would you read the 14th Amendment? Something like that. And you will have to learn the first 5 amendments, which is pretty easy when we get there. And so you're reading the Constitution this week. And don't just fly through those pages and think this doesn't matter. Go through your Constitution, use a highlighter and highlight where it says Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. Make some divisions so that you can quickly find the articles and find what applies to the president, what applies to the Senate, what applies to the judiciary branch, so that you can find your way around in the Constitution when we are in class. So then the writing assignment is, and it's due 2 weeks later, session 11, is a Declaration or Constitution history paper. This is one of the most fun papers that you get to write for this class. You can make a timeline, all the bad things that the king did that led up to our declaring our independence. You could do a historic building, find out where the Constitution was signed, where the Declaration was signed, find out the extensive history of the Constitution. because it went through, there's not just one day out of the year, 1 year that you can date this. It's a process of writing these documents. Or pick a historic building. You could do something on Mount Vernon for George Washington, or you could do something about Thomas Jefferson, some of the buildings that he designed, or some of his cool little inventions that he did. You can choose anything historical in that time period about a building or the Declaration or the Constitution itself. You could choose a person, something like that. Just have that okay by your teacher. This turns into be something quite interesting. I had a student one time who did the history of the White House along with little sketches and everything, and it was just wonderful, wonderful. And I learned so much that I didn't know. And optional online is someone reading Daniel Webster's Plymouth Oration when they landed here 100 or 200 years later. Now I've forgotten, you'll have to wait till session 9, that Daniel Webster reads this oration at Plymouth Rock, where the Puritans first came aboard. Session 10, we're still going through the Constitution. In session 10, we have a fun constitutional game. Your teacher, facilitator, parent will have to email me to get that. I often will put everything onto a flash drive and just send it to the parent, facilitator, or teacher. And we'll have it's called the preamble scramble, to see who can assemble the preamble correctly first. And you break into groups, or if there's only 2 of you, you're on your own against each other. And then talking about founding documents today, and then some Longfellow poetry handouts. And then we start reading about American poets. That's in our syllabus. And the writing, you're still working on that Constitution, the Declaration paper that's due the next week. And then I tell you, bring Ralph Waldo Emerson next week. Bring his book. He went down and dug up his wife. I almost could bring him to class. Don't go dig him up and bring him to class. Just bring his book. And 101 poets next week. And then usually this is the Thanksgiving week is the following week. Might not apply to you, but Thanksgiving week, I've never met for class. So no class the week of Thanksgiving, because it always interferes. Session 11, we begin talking about Romanticism and Transcendentalism. And we start talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson with Self-Reliance, which is a long essay about being self-reliant, which means basically no longer relying on God, but to be self-reliant, no longer glorifying God, but glorifying man himself. And look, there's an optional online where I read aloud Self-Reliance in 1 hour and 9 minutes. I guarantee you it's worth your time, but read it with your book open so that you can highlight or underline or however you mark up your books, and so that you get everything out of Emerson that you need in that 1 hour and 9 minutes. And then you're going to prepare a short essay to explain the changes in thought and worldview from Puritan to Romantic, or you could say transcendental, because transcendental is one of the first flavors of Romanticism, which involves primarily Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. And that transcendental, they kind of transcend we mortals. They transcend, and they kind of become part and parcel of God. God is in them, they're in God. They're one and part of nature. It's a very New Age-ish. And you'll know from reading Emerson that he was very fascinated with what we would call New Age, Eastern thought, things like that. And you're writing a paper that's going to describe, the other way to describe it is, how is Emerson different from the Puritans in his worldview? And you need to use text quotes to support your ideas. How is he different from the Puritans? Well, he's absolutely opposite. And so it's a hard paper to write. It's a very short paper, but you need to know what you're talking about. You need to have done your reading. Session 11, Transcendentalism. We read Nature, and that is from the syllabus, not from a book. It starts on page 169, and it is quite boring. It's really, other than common sense, it's quite boring, but it's extremely important. Many people don't read it now. I will read it out loud. It takes about an hour to listen to both parts of the audio that I did a read aloud, and you'll get everything important. Read with a highlighter. This is in your syllabus, but you have to read it. You just have to do it and complete that paper. And then it's due the following week. Many years the following week, session 13, this is due session 14. That's after Christmas. So you actually have a long, long time to work on this paper. Look at your schedule and figure it out. I never have classes after the first week of December. Sometimes we have classes December 8 or 9, kind of in the second week, but I like to have about 3.5 weeks off and then come back the first week in January. Because we are generally home educated students and we're all about family, you're traveling, you're taking vacations, you're going into nursing homes, you are making things and helping your mom and learning your own family traditions to be able to carry those on as a young adult yourself. And so I prefer that you have that time. And if you have math or science, something that you just can't stop for 3.5 weeks, you can concentrate on that and not have my class to be looking at. All senior projects need to be approved by your teacher, parent, or the facilitator by session 12. So you have to pick something. Sample topics that people have done. You pick one American author or one American historical figure and do kind of a biography, but make it interesting and add pictures and make it PowerPoint. And research American theater. That's quite interesting. Research a prominent president. You could pick a favorite or a most hated president. Cars in America. When my grandma and grandpa were born, cars were brand new. You take that for granted, but I'm only 65 years old. And my grandpa rode a horse, was a sheriff on a horse. So cars in America, it's fascinating. Choose one war to research. You could do the War for Independence, the difference between calling it the War for Independence and the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, World War I, the war to end all wars. There weren't going to be any more wars after that. They called it the World War. It wasn't called World War I until we had another World War. World War II, Vietnam. You could pick a war to research if you are interested in that. Women's fashion in America, somebody did a really cool PowerPoint on that using books from the library to provide us with pictures. It's amazing and shocking what happens, not with men so much, but women's fashion in America. For example, think about the 1890s. Men are wearing suits everywhere, and these are starch suits with high necks and all that. And all the men are wearing hats. And that's 1890. The women are wearing bustles and they're wearing corsets. My grandmother was put in a corset when she was 9 years old. And then about 6 months, a year later, it grew out of favor and she didn't have to wear it anymore. But she was that close to having all of her bones squeezed into shape. The x-rays of women who wore corsets and had to be trained some of the time they were little girls. It was just absolutely awful. Louisa May Alcott was one of the first proponents of freedom for women in their lingerie because those corsets forced the lungs and the heart and the stomach, forced internal organs to go where they're not supposed to be. It was really horrible. It's not really any better than the African tribes that did the ring stacking so that the neck got higher and higher and longer. It's simply unjust and incorrect. What happens to people moving from farms to the city? That all happened from 1890s to 1920. Women's fashion's 1890. They're all wearing long dresses, covering their necks, their ankles, and everything, and long hair. And then 1920, women are cutting their hair off, and they're sometimes even showing their knees and wearing sleeveless garments, things like that, and bobbing their hair. Absolutely shocking. If your grandma is still wearing the 1890s fashion and 30 years later, you are wearing the 1920s. Big deal. And at the same time period, we have people moving from farms to the city. And this created the greatest social upheaval of American history, is everyone moving from the farms and moving into the city. We'll talk about that more in that class. Communications in America. How has communications? You only know the iPhone, but the iPhone wasn't introduced until I think 2008, and that changed the world forever. That changed everything, and I feel sorry for you. And social media. You could do the advent of social media or communications and the destruction socially that has done. You could perform a skit. If you have another senior you can work with or a friend who is willing to help you, you could create a game. I've had that done. That's really fun. You could prepare a sketchbook of major poets or authors. If you are an artist, you could prepare an American worldview overview in PowerPoint if you can do that in 7 minutes. Kind of the coolest things you've learned so far. Your presentation should be 5 to 7 minutes long. If you have 2 seniors working together, I suggest about 12 minutes. Okay, senior projects, they have to have the outline ready by, well, I did say session 12, and here I say session 14, so somewhere in there. Session 14 is after Christmas. Senior presentations are presented session 30 or 31, the very end of the year. Things that we look for, you must, good eye contact. Are you looking at your audience? Do you know your material well enough? And that's one advantage for PowerPoint. Your information is all there. You introduce your topic, you tell us what you're going to teach us. You don't go too fast. You don't go too slow. You have confidence. You don't say, like, things like that. Like visuals, I do suggest PowerPoint. The clarity of your information. Can we understand what you just taught us? Did we learn something? And the number of resources utilized. Tell me what you used. Hopefully it's not just all the internet. Session 13, we're reading Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. We read this in seminary, Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. And I took a class from author Randy Alcorn one time, and he talked about civil disappointment, disobedience, which was amazing. He counted the cost before he picketed that abortion clinic, and then he was targeted, and they put a lien against him. I think the judgment was for, I don't know, 3 million or 8 million. It's been about 20 years ago. And he said, I will not give money to the abortion clinic. And so when you decide to practice civil disobedience, you must always count the cost first, count the cost. Randy Alcorn had to step aside from being the pastor of his church because he didn't want the church to be sued. He had to sell basically everything and live on borrowed everything. If he earned anything more than minimum wage, they would garnish his wage. And so he only earned minimum wage. All of those books that he wrote, he's quite a famous, well-selling author still. And all of those books, all the proceeds, all went to different charities. He just funneled it all into different charities so that he wouldn't earn the money, so that he wouldn't pay the abortion clinic. They did finally drop that judgment from him, I think. I don't know, you'd have to look that up. That'd be a great senior project, the whole thing that happened to Randy Alcorn. But that's civil disobedience. Or even the Egyptian midwives, who would not kill the Hebrew children. That was civil disobedience. That was practicing civil disobedience. Or during World War II, the people who helped hide the Jews, they were practicing civil disobedience. And so are there times for civil disobedience? Yes, where you would disobey civil law. But this is a handout that is from a class I took in seminary, Western Seminary here in Portland, Oregon. And this is from one of Dr. Carl Laney's classes. Anything that I give you that a handout that someone else has given to me, I have labeled it with their name and where I got it. Usually I put the year on there. When it comes up, session 13, maybe I give you the year. And you finish writing that paper. And you can listen to me read Civil Disobedience. And it only takes a little over an hour. And then next week, you bring Walden with you. Walden's a wild ride. So this is after Christmas, session 14. You're turning that from Puritan to Romantic. You know, they're opposites, or how did we get there? You have a little quiz on civil disobedience that is surface level. And then we do an overview of worldviews in class, and we review for our exam. And you read 20, 30, or 40 pages of Walden, depending on your grade level, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11, 12. You select, and I'll kind of give you some ideas in class, pages you might want to read, and we'll turn to some pages and I'll say, okay, here we go, you know, top of page 30 or middle of page 30, and you can read with a highlighter there and listen to that. And so Walden is really a kick. You're going to narrate or journal the story of what you read, have your mom sign it and say, yes, you know, Junior did read these 20, 30 or 40 pages so that I know you did it. Excuse me. An alternate assignment, which is much more fun, is to make your own Walden style journal, either seriously or satirical. Now, it is usually January, session 14, but ideally you would be outside barefoot, enjoying nature as you describe nature. And you can choose to be a theist if you want, or you can do a role play and be a romantic. I have had students do wonderful journals. These, as well as Huckleberry Finn, these two papers may be done by hand and not on the computer if you like. Everything else has to be done on the computer. But this journal you can do by hand, make a little booklet, staple it in middle, glue in leaves and dead bugs and twigs and things like that, and go explore nature. It's to be similar to Walden. And when we get there, you'll understand it. And the following week, session 15, this is such a cool read. Frederick Douglass's narrative. He, on the narrative on the life of Frederick Douglass, not the death, excuse me. We do our second quarter exam, do that in class or do that at home and then come to class. That's my suggestion by the second quarter exam, is that you have students do it at home with the parents' permission. I send it home session 14, folded and stapled. and then they have a parent unstaple it and administer the exam, or you email it to them and they print it up and they proctor, they oversee that exam, and then the student brings it back to class. It's our introduction to slavery in America. And we're reading pages 1 to 35 of Frederick Douglass's narrative. He's a powerful, powerful writer. And I wish someone, there were no recordings of voices at that time, but I wish we could hear him speak, because all of history says he was an eloquent, masterful speaker, very powerful, powerful. And we start reading his autobiography. I know you will enjoy that. Very powerful writer and speaker. Session 16, we continue that narrative and take a quiz. We have weekly quizzes. This is actually a quiz, and we do take weekly quizzes. You can kind of see what they're like, that it's multiple choice and pretty easy to pick. And then you're writing, you're continue working on that biography. You're doing a biography that's due 17. I'm going back a slide here. A biography of Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, of Henry David Thoreau, or of Frederick Douglass. And so that's due session 17. Back to slide 46. The following week, session 17, you bring Uncle Tom's Cabin to class. And this is the end of the second quarter, no late work, of course. Session 17, we start a 5-week project. And this is Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is an amazing book. I don't know what you've heard about Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I know you've heard slams against African Americans, people with dark skin, whatever you want to say, Americans with dark skin are called Uncle Toms, and it often implies that they are subservient to white people, saying yes sir, master, that type thing, giving them what they want. Well, those are all the people who have not read Uncle Tom's Cabin. In literature, Uncle Tom's Cabin is a literary Christ type. That means that Uncle Tom is so much like Christ that he is a literary Christ type. What Uncle Tom does is what Jesus would have done. And Uncle Tom is amazing. You will be a better person after reading this book. How Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this book is still amazing, but I'll wait till we get there and talk about it. You're reading the first 9 chapters. Your assignment is either a character analysis, a theme analysis, or a plot analysis. A character analysis would be analyzing a character. For example, if you did Uncle Tom, you would say Uncle Tom is a literary Christ type. He is a Black slave in pre-Civil War America who always does what is right regardless of the personal cost to him. That would be an analysis of his character. Theme analysis would be a theme of the book. Uncle Tom's Cabin, in Uncle Tom's Cabin, writer Harriet Beecher Stowe shows how people are people, no matter the color of their skin or the station in life, that people are people. And Stowe is showing that Uncle Tom is a Christ type. He's like Jesus. If you're a Christian, you need to be like Uncle Tom, not any of the other people in the book. All right. And so you have this writing assignment, but make sure again that your copy of Uncle Tom is not edited or abridged. You have to read the original. Session 18, we continue reading Uncle Tom's Cabin. We have a quiz every week so that you keep up with your reading in the pages, and you keep working on that assignment that you started on. Session 19, we just have a quiz on last week's reading. You have a long time before this paper is due, not till session 22. But he is a Christ type. This is a sample of structured notes for students. I do have structured notes that are special for Uncle Tom. Sometimes I've gone to places like Pink Monkey or some of the other online book helper sites. I can't think of any of the others right now. Cliff Notes Online, and look at their outlines, even copy their outlines. And then I delete all the part that doesn't apply to our class, and then I add other things that apply to Christians or to our class. So it is possible that some of the actual sentences in my structured notes are from other places and they're not cited. And I ask you to forgive me for that, because I wrote all of these 28 years ago and it wasn't such a big deal 28 years ago. And I didn't really think about this ever being online and all of that. Let's see. So then we have a quiz, and you've got another couple of weeks to write your paper. In your syllabus, you're starting to read about Mark Twain, and you continue reading. Session 21, we're still reading. You have quiz every week, and then we are, let's see. Oh, during this class time, I'll say, turn to page, what page is this in the syllabus? I'm not sure, but I'll have you turn to the 14th Amendment and I'll ask someone to read that, please. I have the amendments in our syllabus up through 1992. There have been further amendments, but you have to look those up on your own. And the 14th Amendment is extremely important, especially for that phrase, equal protection, that I have underlined here. And so I'll be asking you to look in your syllabus and have someone read that out loud in class so that you realize what that is. The whole idea of separate but equal, that people have tried to make equal protection. Basically, it means people are people are people are people, like Dr. Seuss. You have to excuse me there. Let's see. Okay, session 22. We have an intro to realism and we get into Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is that other project that you can do in handwriting. I've had kids write this paper with a Sharpie pen, or written on a jean with Sharpie pens, or written on a grocery bag with a felt pen or something like that. And you can take the voice of Huckleberry Finn if you want, and have poor grammar, poor spelling, and contractions everywhere. And the spelling and grammar doesn't count because you're having fun writing like Huckleberry Finn writes. Some mothers tell me it's always quite funny that the 3 weeks that we are reading Huckleberry Finn, that their kids lose grammar. You lose it all, which is hilarious. It's true. You can start talking like Huck Finn after a while. There are bad words in Huckleberry Finn. And I would suggest that if you're reading this out loud at home, I would suggest that you don't use the NI double or a word. I would suggest that you use something like stupid head instead of the bad word, because I think that kind of says the same thing, not as bad, but a stupid head works pretty good. And so when Mark Twain uses that word, I think stupid head, or if you think of something better, you can use it. And it really speaks that you just don't want to say those words in front of little kids who might repeat that word. That's really fallen out of favor for everybody anywhere, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, where I don't think anybody I know has ever used that word. So we don't want to use it reading out loud. And we'll be talking about Mark Twain and God. I have always kind of favored books about American lit that talk about the relationship of the author with God. Are they a Christian or not? And Mark Twain is fascinating that way. He was even a neighbor of Harriet Beecher Stowe, if you can imagine that. And so we start reading Huckleberry Finn. It's a great book. And then you have a paper choice, and it's a short paper. And it is due session 26. So you have 4 weeks to work on that. Theme study, character study. You have to have 3 or more quotes from the text. You have to have quotes from the text to support your paper, whatever kind of paper you write for whatever project that it is. And we have structured notes for Huck Finn too, where we'll go through talking about the Civil War, the 14th Amendment. We'll talk about the Missouri Compromise, the Dred Scott decision. That's another Supreme Court decision that was rescinded. It was a bad decision and they rescinded it. It's very similar to the abortion, rescinding that. They just said it was a bad law. We never should have done that. So they rescinded it. And the same thing with Dred Scott. So we will be reading some of the history leading up to Huck Finn with Mark Twain. It's fascinating. Session 23, we're continuing in Huck Finn, and we'll be reading chapters 1 to 18. Let's see, the quiz is over Huck Finn chapters 1 to 18. Lots of Huck Finn is just hilarious and ridiculous and absurd. But the quiz is always surface level. If you read the book, you will understand it. And then you turn in your syllabus reading checklist after spring break. Generally, spring break is following this time period. And I say, enjoy spring break. I hope this is spring break for you. It's session 23. If it's not, deal with it. Okay, session 24, the third quarter exam. I do suggest that you do this at home, let the parents proctor it, and then you have your 2 hours, full 2 hours of class time. There is a quiz over just the reading in Huckleberry Finn, and you'll turn in your syllabus reading checklist. The reading checklist is usually worth about 7 to 10% of your quarter's grade. So if you do half the syllabus reading, 50%, then you have a 10% value paper that you only get 50%, and that probably prevents you from having an A that quarter. It's extremely important that you do your syllabus reading, please. That's your textbook. That syllabus is your textbook. Then the following week, you'll be bringing Great American Short Stories, which is a pretty cool book and bring a pen or a highlighter to class for session 25. Session 25. Now we are probably up to, where are we at in time? We're in April. By session 25, you are probably in April. And you're going to turn in that Huck Finn project. Many of those are fun. If they're elaborate, large, delicate, written on shirts, things like that, I try to be as very careful as I can with that. Your teacher will too. But it is fun to show off to the class the very best of those projects so everyone can enjoy them. Your reading is from the Great American Short Stories, and you're reading Young Goodman Brown. It's a story about a Puritan, but not written by a Puritan, written by a remote relative of a Puritan. And young Goodman Brown and Nathaniel Hawthorne is really to blame for the wrong vision of the Puritans that we have in education today. To learn about the Puritans, you need to just read the Puritans. And we did that our first 4 or 5 weeks of school this year. We read about the Puritans. Don't read Nathaniel Hawthorne, published in 1835, to learn about people who lived in 1635. He's too late to the game to tell us what Puritans are really like. But that's why we read Young Goodman Brown. What have people done to history? What did Hawthorne do? And we read Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. Awesome, but scary. You either will love him or hate him. Excuse me again. 101 Great American Poems. You'll be reading Walt Whitman's "O Captain, My Captain," which is his eulogy to President Abraham Lincoln. Page 25, Emily Dickinson, "I could not stop for death, so death stopped for me." Beautiful poem. And Poe's The Raven. "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary." All written in 8 metrical feet. Awesome poem. From the syllabus, you'll be reading about these poets, about Nathaniel Hawthorne and about Walt Whitman, and reading about naturalism in general. And by this time, getting into naturalism, we are into a very, very harsh flavor of romanticism. Naturalism just presumes that it operates in a theological void, presuming that there is no God. And so in naturalistic short stories, we have this presumption that there is no God and that there is no one to help you, and that prayer is nothing but you trying to make yourself feel better, that Christianity is a crutch, that the world is out to get you, that nature is out to get you. Nature is often personified. But it's fascinating reading, and it does help to teach you about worldview and shifting worldviews. And that's the key thing about this class, is to learn about shifting worldviews, so that when you pick up a newspaper, book, or magazine today and forever, that you will be able to make a good assessment on the worldview of the writer, so that you will understand where they're coming from and what the basis of their belief is and what their presumptions are. False though they be, you need to know where their presumptions are. For these stories, you have vocabulary lists, and you'll be defining words. If your teacher asks you to do a different assignment, you may. I have considered before just giving you the vocabulary list with all the definitions and then assigning a different project. So that will be up to your parent or teacher. And this will do session 26 the next week. So it's just a 1-week project. Online, there are now Thelma read alouds. I just made them last year for Young Goodman Brown and The Telltale Heart. And I also do a little bit of worldview instruction in those read alouds. It's not just reading aloud from the text. I'm pointing things out. I will say, you realize this character is an expression of Satan. Session 26, our introduction to naturalism. What is naturalism? And you'll have a little open book quiz, and I'll say, what is naturalism? You've got 5 minutes, go. And you will be, if you remember, you'll go to your glossary, look at what naturalism is, and syllabus page. Let's see, naturalism, it's on a syllabus page. It'll come up in your lesson. So you can tell me what naturalism is, that it operates in the absence of God. There's a theological void. There's a presumption that there is no God, that you're on your own. Mankind is an accident, and all of nature is harsh, and that only the strongest will survive. It's really a Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest. And you'll be reading from the Great American Short Stories, Bret Harte, which is cool. There's a fun story, The Luck of Roaring Camp. Bret Harte was writing when the Northwest was really a wild cowboy place, and he had around the time of the gold rush, and he is, or just after that, and he's writing. They call those stories the Vanishing West. The Wild West is kind of disappearing and becoming more and more civilized, and The Luck of Roaring Camp is kind of about that time period. There's only one woman in camp, and she's not a good woman, and then she has a baby, and what are these guys all going to do? And so it's kind of a funny, sad story. Stephen Crane. And then let's see, that was Bret Harte. Then Stephen Crane's The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, another Vanishing West story, where you have the story of they don't have any nice women at this little town called Yellow Sky. And what on earth happens when the sheriff gets married and brings his wife back to this town? And the bad people can't be as bad anymore. Because there's a woman in town. Really funny stories. And then Louisa May Alcott, some short stories. We'll be reading about Louisa May a night. My Contraband. These are wonderful stories. My Contraband, which is a Black person, is her contraband. A fascinating story. And there are now Thelma read-alouds for all of these. Then from Mark Twain's humorous stories and sketchbooks, Little Dover edition, The Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, The Stolen White Elephant, and How to Tell a Story. And you'll be reading from your syllabus about Louisa May Alcott and about Henry Melville. There are read-alouds for The Luck of Roaring Camp, for A Night, and Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, and for My Contraband. So there are lots of read-alouds now. Session 27, you're getting down to the end of the year. Everything is a lot easier by this point. You've got structured notes to go through that describe modernism in American literature. We will cover most of that information in class through the next few classes, but sometimes the structured notes just provide you with a structure of history and shifting worldview, so that you can use the structured notes to review for exams and quizzes, and just to understand, okay, what was this? Oh, that's right, World War I, the war to end all wars. Yes, that's right. And when we entered the war, we entered late, and we'll talk about a few of those things in class, and automobiles and communications, and then silent movies, and then referring to this generation of World War I as the lost generation. They came back from war and nothing was ever the same again. And that can be said. Many of these people are suffering from PTSD. It just doesn't have a name yet. And then we're reading, so our structure notes take us through realism and naturalism, which are just other flavors of romanticism, working us toward where we're at today, which is complete emotional worldview, romantic emotional worldview, where we're at today. So we're going through notes. Then we will be talking about Bartleby and Steinbeck. We'll read out loud in class John Steinbeck's Nobel Prize speech on syllabus page 317. Amazing. You could go through that now or this week if you wanted to, and highlight it up with your pen. And it's really an amazing Nobel Prize speech that says where we're at with John Steinbeck. And then in class reading of both stories, we'll start a little bit of reading. So you're reading from the Great American Short Stories, you're reading Bartleby and Steinbeck's Red Pony. We have part of that in our syllabus, and then you're reading a synopsis of Grapes of Wrath because it's quite a novel. If you want to know more about the Grapes of Wrath, you could get a copy from the library and read the last 5 or 7 pages, and then you kind of know why we don't really read it. And the Scopes Trial, you'll be reading about the real Scopes Trial. Some of you perhaps have seen movies of the Scopes Trial that are all, of course, slanted to make Christians look foolish and ridiculous. And so you'll have information on the real Scopes Trial from a Christian source in your syllabus, pages 265 to 276. Then your writing is to explain naturalism in Steinbeck's Red Pony. And of course, we'll talk about this in class, and I'll give you words. You may even have an email. I've prepared some emails that I've given to your parent or teacher or facilitator that they can send after some of our classes to just further explain to you, and I believe there's an email here, to further explain about Red Pony and to explain a little bit to you about naturalism in the Red Pony so that you can write about it. And by this point in class, session 27, I believe it will be very obvious to you, and you'll be able to catch the naturalism in there quite easily by catching some of the words. And I do read aloud Bartleby, and it's a long read. It's an hour and 11 minutes to listen to. but it's very, very important, Henry Melville. And so you're reading that. Session 28, Modernism, Naturalism in Crane's Open Boat. And so you turn in your naturalism red pony paper. And by this time in the year, your teacher may not require the red pony paper to be in an official essay format. She might accept quote format where you give the quote and then explain all about the quote, how it proves naturalism. That'll be up to your teacher parent. We have an open notebook quiz where I just say, okay, pick one or pick two, explain Romanticism, explain realism, explain naturalism, and give you 5 minutes for each one. And I usually have students do one or two of those, or they can pick two of those, and then you rush to your glossary and write what you can about Romanticism, following your emotions. It's a very emotional worldview. Realism, where you just simply write realistically. In realism, you write about picking noses and spitting in the ground and birds pecking eyeballs out and things like that. Naturalism, where nature not only is harsh, but it's really out to get you. And then modernism, where we have left God behind. So you'll be looking those up and writing as much as you can about one or two of those worldviews, using your glossary and any other notes or papers that you have or that you know how to find in your syllabus, and writing as much as you can on a piece of paper in 5 minutes. It's really a good mental exercise to do that. And then we'll start talking about open boat in class, and then we'll begin talking about some of the very important later writers, Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Charles Darwin, and their influence on American authors, because Darwin especially, and Friedrich Nietzsche, and Freud and Marx are extremely important in American literature, influenced many, many writers. So then we'll be reading fun stories. Fitzgerald, Bernice bobs her hair. This is a big deal. Her grandma still wears long gowns and high neck things, and Bernice is going to a special party with her grandma. And not only is she wearing a dress that might show her knees and might have bare arms, might be sleeveless, she cuts her hair. And that's a big, big deal. We've completely lost that in 2022, but it's a very funny story. Bernice bobs her hair. And then we'll be reading from Hemingway, The Killers, which is ruthless and sad. And from Jack London, To Build a Fire, which is fascinating examination of a person going up into Alaska, and the animals are simply more prepared. They have better instincts than the man does. In fact, the man doesn't even have a name. The dog doesn't have a name. It's the man and the dog. But by the time we get to naturalism, we've reduced everything down to Darwin terms. To Build a Fire. Stephen Crane's poem, War is Kind, a very satirical examination of war, how kind it is. Quite a lot of satire. Excuse me. And from the syllabus, we'll be reading Open Boat, and I did make a read aloud of Open Boat. Hopefully it says that here. I don't have it here. I think there's a Thelma read aloud of Open Boat. You'll be reading a biography of Hemingway, and we'll be talking about him in class. And Jack London, we'll be talking about him in class. And you'll have an excerpt from a very good book called Biology is Destiny, Charles Darwin. You'll be reading about Charles Darwin from that book, from the book 7 Men Who Rule the World from the Grave. It's a great book. Shouting Heresy in the Temple of Darwin. So you have an excerpt from a Christianity Today magazine. And you'll be examining the naturalistic elements in one of those short stories by either Hemingway or London, with quotes from the text. Always use the text and utilize the syllabus pages that are listed here in session 28 for elements of naturalism. And it's very easy. I think page 315 is dedicated to naturalism. It's an excerpt out of some type of American lit book from 40 years ago, something like that. An alternative assignment would be to contrast literary elements with realist or naturalist. So you could compare theist, which everything is written to glorify God, everything we do and say is written to glorify God. When something bad happens to you, it's because that needs to happen to you. It's because we are just travelers on this earth, very, very theistic, that we're just passing through. And the more we lose here, the shorter our roots here will be, so that when it is our time to go and we're old or sick and go, that we'll be ready. We'll be ready to go. Very theistic. Whereas naturalistic is looking at things that the world is really out to get you. And it's only survival of the fittest, and you need to fine tune your instincts. You need to become more like an animal because animals are better equipped to survive, and it's survival of the fittest. So that writing assignment gets kind of cool. And then the Sound and Fury, I used to have students do this in class, and that is no longer possible because the vocabulary is too difficult. But at one time, I had students, I don't know the year it is, but there is, it's placed in session 28, American Lit session 28 at my website. And it's a link to a YouTube O. Henry skit that two of my TAs did. It's 6.5 minutes long. And if you can watch it in class, then do watch it in class that week, session 28. If you can't watch it in class, assign it to be watched at home. And they do such a good job that they get past the difficult vocabulary, and you'll laugh. It's a funny short skit. Session 29, we're almost to the end of the year, and you get to, we'll be looking at story elements from T.S. Eliot, and we'll look at some of O. Henry's humor. O. Henry is very rarely read anymore, and that's why I made Thelma read-alouds of O. Henry. That was back on slide 58, O. Henry. I don't list here that I have done Thelma read-alouds of all of the O. Henry that's assigned. Everything from O. Henry that is assigned, there are Thelma read-alouds now for. And I'll make it so you can understand it. And they're actually quite cute stories. You just have to be able to go back in time before phones and things like that to get to O. Henry. He's the guy who wrote the story about the girl with beautiful long hair who had her hair cut off and sold it to buy a watch chain for her husband's watch, a pocket watch. And at the same time, it's called The Gift of the Magi. And at the same time, he sold his watch to buy beautiful combs for her hair. And so you can see the irony there. But it's really a cute story, famous story, The Gift of the Magi. And so there is a Thelma read-aloud for that so that you understand that. And then your syllabus reading gets really wild and crazy at this point. You are reading all types of excerpts about the beat movement so that you know what a beatnik is and who the Beats were and how important they were after Vietnam. And then you'll read about the New Age movement. They're still around. If you wonder why your neighbor won't knock down that bee's nest and says, live and let live, or won't kill the spiders in the house, that's New Age. That's New Age. Animal work with PETA. I will tell you, don't go to the PETA website because they have naked people wrapped in saran wrap, like plastic, like a plastic meat tray with plastic wrapped around the meat. PETA at their website will have naked people wrapped in plastic on giant meat trays to try to say that when you're eating an animal, you're doing something really, really bad. It's for the people for ethical treatment of animals, not like my husband says, people eating tasty animals. And of course, PETA does, regardless of whether you eat meat or not, PETA never does solve the problem of what about animals who eat animals? How do we deal with that? And how do animals die in the wilderness if there are no hunters, if hunters are not hunting them? For example, a deer. You may not be a hunter, you might not even like hunting, but what happens to a deer when it gets old or sick or weak or injured? It's eaten alive by another animal. And so is hunting really that bad, whether you like it or not? We have to look at things using logic and reason. Logic is usually the way out of all of the postmodern nonsense. Star Trek, what was their agenda? I'm sorry if you love Star Trek. I like it too. But it had an underlying agenda: gay marriage. Is it really possible to have gay marriage? What is the definition of marriage? Where did it come from? And is that nonsensical, or is that a true statement to say gay marriage? Then we read some presidential inauguration speeches. Should America still be a city on a hill? You'll know what that's all about. America, that goes back to Matthew 5:14, I think. Should America be a city on a hill with all the world looking upon us, and all the world will want to be like this? That's why that's called American exceptionalism, or the great experiment that worked. Our country was a great experiment. You'll learn that in the first few sessions. We were a huge experiment to not have a king, to decide to have constitutional law, and to have 24 men get together and figure all of this out and have something that will last this long. I realize parts of it are falling apart now, but anyway, it's interesting. The presidential inauguration speeches used to always mention something about being a city on a hill, or a light for other people to look at, or a good example for the world. That's why when the American military accidentally kills civilians, for example, if we're bombing bad guys, but we accidentally kill civilians, we are hated around the world, and everybody says how horrible it is. Other places on the earth accidentally kill people in military exercises all the time, and it never makes world news. It's because we claim to be exceptional. And there are people who say American exceptionalism is no longer true. We're not any better, different than other people. Presidents have generally reflected this in their inaugural addresses, something about we're going to be a good example, that's how good we're going to be, but that is disappearing. And so it's worth reading some inaugural addresses to see. Extreme environmentalism, where the plants are more important than the people, where saving the earth, for example, if you believe that the earth is going to be here forever, if you don't believe that there will be an end to the earth, if you don't know what the Bible says about the end of the earth, about a rapture or Christ coming to take his church or a new earth, if you don't know any of that, then this earth becomes extremely important, and you must preserve and save the earth at all costs, no matter what. This is, as I'm making this video, it's currently August 1st, 2022. And right now, politically, there's a huge push to just let people pay more than $5 a gallon for gas, that we have to suffer this way because we have to save the earth. We have to quit our dependence on fossil fuels and all of that. And it all goes to an underlying worldview, so that you get to pick what crazy postmodern thing am I going to write about for my last paper. Can political figures separate their personal and civic lives or duties? This came into play. You'll be reading about President Clinton. Can you be immoral and still be a good president? And of course, everyone's actually immoral because everyone's a sinner. But can you be immoral to the point of having an affair and the world finds out about it and you're a president? Can you still be a good president? And you can write about that if you want. Population explosion. Is there really a population explosion? Back in the 70s, when I was your age, everyone thought there was going to be a population explosion. We'd all die from lack of food and all of that. Now we're suffering almost in every country in the world a population implosion. There are very few willing to accept it, but it's an easy internet search to do. American population, what's happening to the American population, and we're deflating. Nobody wants to have kids anymore. We are saved here in America by immigration, people coming in. I have a whole bunch of relatives, wonderful relatives, who immigrated in from the Philippines, waited 24 years to get here. We're saved by immigration. These people come, they work really hard, they pay taxes, and they keep us alive. When I think Social Security, that would be in a session, maybe 10 or 15 sessions ago, Social Security, when it was first created, there were 33 or 30 something people working for every one person collecting Social Security. It seemed like a great idea. Now there are like 2 point some people working for everyone collecting Social Security. And so that's getting rather difficult because those of us who are older have paid in for years and years and years and years. And if we could get all that money back, we'd be millionaires. But can we even get back a part of what we put in now? And it might not be possible because there aren't enough young people working, because nobody has people, nobody has babies. So God bless those big homeschool families and all of that. You really need to have 6 children in a family just to theoretically to support your 2 adults who will your parents who will eventually go on Social Security. All right, so do we need to control the population? No. And what does it mean to be human? And this is an excellent handout. So you're reading a whole bunch of things, and one of those is supposed to inspire you to do something grand in your last paper and write about something that you're very fervent, you feel fervently about. So your promo paper is due session 30, very next week, and that's your last paper. You have to have text quotes from your sources. You can't turn in a late paper. You can use a bullet point format if you want to say, if you want to take something population explosion, or you could start giving a bunch of facts and then write about the facts and not put it in an essay format so that you can have more information in just 1 week time. Session 30, into modernism, we'll review the exam. That is our last week. And if you want, you can send home that exam and they can bring it back the next week. We'll be reading from O. Henry, which is really fun in O. Henry. Oh, and here are the read alouds: The Gift of the Magi, The Cop and the Anthem, Springtime a la carte, The Green Door, After 20 Years, and The Ransom of Red Chief, the funny one. So these are really fun stories. This is up to your parent, teacher, or facilitator. It is possible, if you have something else you want to insert into American Lit, you could get rid of O. Henry. He is 118 years back. But O. Henry is also awesome, and he's a big part of American literature. But this class is pretty jam-packed with literature. I don't believe that you can add anything without taking something away. If you have to take something away, you could take Emerson's Nature out and put something else in there, but then you've missed a big one. You could take O. Henry out and add something else that you desire. But O. Henry is really a fun one. So I'm not sure you're going to have to do what you want to do with that. I still love O. Henry. And then session 31, the final exam. If you want to have a little party, have the kids do their exam at home and bring it back this week. And then you have the entire class of 2 hours to work with. I generally have a 2-hour class and we take a 10-minute break. So it's really an hour and 50 minutes. You can make it 2 hours and 10 minutes if you want to exclude your 10-minute break, depending on what works for your class. Also at the 1 hour mark, I give a 10-minute break and I do use a timer so that we're all actually back at the 10-minute. Because sometimes in the spring, students will even run outside to get a little fresh air and they have to be back. I start talking at the 10-minute mark after break, and they soon learn if they're not here. I'm just talking and they're missing it. So session 31 is the last session. We'll have kids giving their senior projects this week and turn it in there or take it in class, and it takes a little over an hour usually. And there I do have an American Lit Jeopardy game. It is quite difficult, I'm told. I can send that to anyone who asks me for it, but it is possible that you might need to change it up a little bit to apply to your class, not use questions that your class will not know the answers to. Change it up as you wish, but this is the last class. And after this point, you are ready for your class party and to say, we did American Lit. And you will be prepared. For example, if you go to Corban University here in Oregon, you would be more than prepared for American Thought and Culture. I think you would have to add The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and you would have to add some poetry and more poetry, and you would have to add The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. If you added those, I know if you add that, you can CLEP, C-L-E-P, you could CLEP American Lit. I've had 5 students do that so far. You could CLEP American Lit and get a college credit for it at Corban anyway. They would give you a credit for it, and then you could skip American Thought and Culture and take something else that year. Most colleges accept CLEP credits. You can look up CLEP credit American Lit, look it up when you finish this class, and then see what you don't know on the sample tests that are online. But you would need to read Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane and read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and you'd have to do more poetry. Okay, you finish this class, and I'm very proud of you. Your parent or teacher or facilitator, I know, is proud of you, and we're keeping this just under 2 hours. The Lord bless you.